I created the character of Nigel as I used to do sketch comedy on YouTube years and years ago. I work in digital content, so that was kind of like my gateway drug into doing like branded content and doing it professionally.
Gotcha.
So I started moving away from doing my own YouTube stuff because once you start doing it for a living, it starts to feel like work and it's like not as fun anymore. So I've been pouring myself more into like, my my more elaborate film projects because those are like longer gestating, things that I can um, work out without the treadmill of like cranking out a lot of content, which I'm sure you can relate to.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, it was probably around 2012 was when I first created the character, and it never really went viral. It was a character that was always just fun to sort of play. I grew up. I'm a '90s kid, so I grew up with like VH1 Behind the Music, and I was always fascinated with rock star interviews and particularly Ozzy Osbourne. So it was like before his reality show, which kind of like put him on a different stratosphere in terms of like the public perception, but
Right.
his interviews are hilarious. And like, it's just he'll talk and it's just like a string of bleeps and and you could barely understand him.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the genesis of like this but also part of the joke in the sketch comedy was like, is this rock star, but like who the hell is this guy? Like, we don't hear his music. Like, it's like, oh, and every time he's talking about his band, it's like a different band every time he talks about it. So, it's like that's like kind of the joke. But it's this character that it was just kind of fun to dust off every once in a while and, pull out. We did, a friend of mine did a web series, back in 2014, I think, or it was a web pilot that didn't really go anywhere. And it was just kind of an idea that I always wanted to do and just never really stopped thinking about was like, well, what if we gave him like a movie and it's like horror tinged and this idea of he's trying to find his band. He's like trapped in this interview and it turns out that he died and went to hell and he's like that's the hook, is
Yeah.
that he has to like break out of his own like VH1 Behind the Music special. um and so that's kind of where it started. And the musical element was like, okay, well, if we're gonna have him like at this point, I didn't know if it was gonna be a short or a feature, and so it's like kind of a baby feature, a little like extra large short. It's a little bit in between. But it was like, well, regardless, it's like we're gonna have to hear the music. So that was always like a little bit of a hurdle. Where I come from a theater background. I my degrees in theater. I've done musical theater. But I never really considered myself like a songwriter. I've taken vocal lessons, but and did musical theater, but didn't really uh, think of myself in that like creative space. And at some point, like when you're young and you're like picking a lane, it's like I kind of went into directing and filmmaking and like moved away from music. A few years ago, I started dating a singer-songwriter and whose name is also Steven, which is hilarious. We're the Steves. And it was fascinating because he kind of demystified for me the songwriting process, where he plays guitar. His stuff leans kind of acoustic, and he'll like sketch stuff on the back of a napkin or do like a voice memo. And I don't know why I built it up in my mind of like, oh, songwriting is this thing that comes out fully formed, and it just kind of unlocked something for me where it was like, oh wow, it's just like taking a sketch of an idea and then bringing in your collaborators, just like filmmaking or just like lots of other collaborative art forms. And that was exciting for me because I was like, oh, I think I could do that. I mean, not to be too egomaniacal about it, but I'm like, I think actually, like, I've got some melodies, and it's like if I have the right collaborators, I think I could do that. And Steven admitted he is like not really his genre, but he had worked with some producers in Nashville. We're based in LA. And that's Nathan Meckel and or Nathan McKell, I think is how you pronounce it, and Mark Nemec. Um, and they had worked with Steven on various stuff, but he just instinctively he said, they'd really get the vibe. It's like they've done like rock music, and they're kind of like Gen X. It's like they'll get what you're throwing down, like MTV generation. And so I pitched it to them, and like I'm astonished they didn't laugh me out of the room. But they were like super down to collaborate. And so long story short, we did a session in Nashville. That was fun. It was like one of the most fun things I've ever done was just recording the music for that. I did a couple of like rough demos on my own, and then I would hand them off, and then they did some like pre-production. We brought in some amazing session musicians to do keys and guitar. Mark, who was our engineer, and co-producer, he also did the drums, and then Nathan is like a multi-instrumentalist, so he was like doing most of the arranging, and so yeah, we so that was 2 years ago, and so we basically wrote the soundtrack first, and I had a loose idea for a story, but I wanted to get the songs in place because I was like, okay, I want to do a full music video for every song. And then I want to like shoot behind the scenes like stuff and like make this mockumentary. And then also there's a narrative film that's like wrapping everything around it. And so in that sense, it's a little bit Spinal Tap. But it's obviously there's the supernatural angle. And so yeah, it was a pretty big undertaking for a short. I went into it very naively thinking that it was going to be this scrappy little thing that I was doing between projects, and it kind of ballooned into this kind of epic project. And so we shot it last year. It was over, I want to say 9 days, 9 shoot days, over 3 months. It was like kind of like dispersed over weekends. And we started with the music videos and then the narrative, and then we did the final concert sequence was our kind of grand finale.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a lot.
I love that. I love the finale, like when they change into the skeletons.
Yep.
Such a great moment, and it's such a great payoff too for the viewer.
Thanks. I actually was going back and forth over the very end shot where they turn back into skeletons, because we didn't, I mean, it was a pretty scrappy budget, all things considered. And so a lot of our costumes and like the skeleton masks in particular, they're just like, it's like spirit Halloween shit, It's like, they're just like latex skeleton masks. And when they're lit a certain way, it kind of works.
Yeah,
But then I had this one that had like a hinged jaw, and it was like to do the like talking. And then we had like some fabric underneath it to like disguise my face. But from we shot it from a few different angles, and it was just looking kind of ridiculous. Like it I wanted it to be kind of cheesy, like that 80s like practical effects. It's like it's okay if it's a little bit cheesy, but it was like it crossed a line where I'm like, this just looks bad in a way that is like taking you out of it. And luckily we were shooting that sequence with three cameras, but there was one camera that was off to the side that there was something about the lighting and the angle. I was like, okay, it's not perfect, but that kind of works. But we shot it both ways, where we ended it with just like our human faces. And it doesn't have that like payoff at the end where it's like it needed a little extra like twist at the end. So that
sure.
so it goes.
So in terms of the songs, like, did you have like any classic '80s hits that you wanted to like evoke?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like definitely I put together a playlist of like inspiration, and I went and did a deep dive on YouTube of 80s music videos, which is just fascinating because
Yeah,
if you look back, especially like the early 80s, it was a very nascent art form, right? And so it was almost like the TikTok of its day,
yeah,
where it's like they're just looking for programming, and so you get some laser lights and fog machines, and it's like, and then the editing is like, and there's like a couple of different locations and maybe a couple of costume changes, but it was, like by today's standards, fairly quaint.
yeah,
And then you get artists like Michael Jackson and Madonna that like, blew up the format into something bigger. And then you get into the 90s where, like I put together, we did a private screening here for Wrathbone in LA, and I put together like an Alamo Drafthouse style pre-show with some music videos. And so there were a couple of Ozzy videos in there. And if you compare like his early 80s stuff and then like his 90s stuff, it's like a quantum leap in terms of budget and like the
Oh
production
yeah,
design. And it's like it's kind of fascinating to see. But they were spending so much money on music videos. And now it's like kind of like it's all cyclical, where a lot of stuff is done in studio and it's like a little scrappier now, but the tools are more accessible. So, but that was fascinating. But yeah, I mean, I would say, like the usual suspects like White Snake and Bon Jovi and obviously Black Sabbath and Van Halen.
mhm,
It's like all of that, not only the music, but also just like the iconography. And it's kind of a fascinating era because a lot of my film work actually deals with queer themes. This doesn't explicitly, but it is, I would say that there are some queer sensibilities in it. It is fascinating to look back on the 80s as like, an era of interesting gender expression. And yet also like at the same time, there's like this casual homophobia and like this like so it's
yeah,
like those things juxtaposed. It's like fascinating, but like the hair metal phenomenon, it's like they're in makeup and it's like
right.
these giant wigs and like leopard print tights, and it's like I don't know, it's like a vibe, but interesting to kind of explore that. Also, notably, our hair, makeup, and wardrobe person was a one-man band. His name's Dakota Payne. Has a drag persona whose name is Gemini, who appears in the Vertigo video, in the private jet, is the
Okay.
dancer there. So it was really fun because with his background in drag, I feel like drag is similar in that it evokes iconography. So that was a lot of fun. We spent a lot of time coming up with like the stock looks and then finding ways to change up the variables. They all have the same sunglasses, almost like cartoon characters. I'm
Love
kind
that.
of weirdly proud of the fact that no one takes off their sunglasses in the entire film. Everyone is wearing some kind of eyewear, which is kind of fun and eccentric.
Yeah. Like your character Frankie, the entire time of this film, every time that that character came up, I kept thinking of Rick Astley and
Oh,
never
for
gonna
sure.
give it
Yeah.
up. Like I was like, that has to be like a riff
Yeah.
on that character, right? Okay.
Well, for one thing, that song is like a go-to for me for karaoke. So I knew that I could do the voice, and so obviously very different character and voice than Nigel. I feel like Nigel's a little bit of Ozzy and a little bit of Axl Rose. It's like the
Yeah.
nasal. You can hear like the vowels of the accent. Um, as a singer, I'm more comfortable like singing as a character, so it's like always fun to like find the voice. And with "Dreamin' That You're Mine," the Frankie Echo song. That one was I had a different songwriting collaborator on that. Her name's Becca Shack. She was my composer on my previous film, Thirst Trap. And she's classically trained. She's a brilliant composer, but also she's an electronic musician and DJ and vocalist. And I had such a great time working with her as a composer. As I was like incubating this song, I was like, I bet it would be fun to collaborate with her on something like this. And then it sounds so different from the rock songs that Nathan and Mark and I wrote. And so it's like I'm still kind of in the mix, but and they ended up kind of being involved in the finishing and the mastering, but the Becca did the arrangement, and she's on camera as the background vocalist and doing the keys, and it was her friend Devin on saxophone, which was so great because like we were like diabolical like scientists like talking about like we need a saxophone in this, we need like we're referencing like George Michael and Kenny G, and it's like other there's Return of the Mac a little bit in there, and in fact I think it's in the same key and tempo as Never Gonna Give You Up, which was kind of our North Star.
Okay.
So you one could conceivably do a mashup of those two songs. I haven't tried it,
Yeah.
but that's yeah, it was very intentional. So that was fun.
Like when you get closer to like releasing this, will those songs be on Spotify?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm learning a lot about music distribution and just all of the stuff that goes into it. It's not as easy as like clicking upload on YouTube, but we're planning a streaming release, hopefully next month.
Okay.
The exact date TBD, but we're going to release the album on streaming in May, and that's going to coincide. I'm going to relaunch my YouTube channel. And so since we made full music videos for all the songs, and you don't see the full videos in the film itself, we're gonna kind of piecemeal um, the music videos on YouTube leading up to eventually we'll release the film at some point after it finishes its festival run. But yeah, there's I've got a link to a press kit that has the MP3s if you're curious
Okay. Yeah. Yeah,
to
for
listen to
sure.
the album. And we actually pressed CDs for the preview audience that we had a few weeks ago. So long live physical media. We might do a vinyl release at some point. This is all new for me, so this is kind of fun to explore the like physical media side of things.
I feel like it needs like a cassette tape to
Yeah.
tape it.
I looked into that too. Believe it or not, cassette tapes are almost as expensive to print as vinyl. It's like, I guess, a novelty factor, but because there are so few companies that do it anymore, and it's like such a specialized process. But that would be pretty rad to do it on cassette.
Yeah. Now, were you big into TRL?
TRL.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not sure. I know what that is.
Like the afternoon, like it came on after school, and like Britney Spears did it, and it was like this.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. On MTV.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not so much. I mean, a little bit. I kind of like tapped out when it's like late '90s, early 2000s. And started getting involved in other TV and other stuff. But I would say probably mid '90s is my sweet spot in terms of like MTV VH1 nostalgia.
Okay. Gotcha. You earlier you were talking about how like 80s glam is like makeup and spandex. It's interesting to see how people get so upset when people do that now, but
Yeah,
they're okay with like 80s people like having done it. So it's interesting to look
yeah.
at that. So
Yeah, I it's there's a lot to unpack there, and like everything is cyclical, and so we might come back to I mean, you're seeing a lot of I mean, nostalgia's in right now, and I think it's because like it feels like everything's crumbling around us. So we all
right.
retreat to the safety net of what we grew up on. It's also like we look at it through rose-tinted glasses, right? Like during the pandemic, I did a marathon of I made a list of 100 '80s horror films that I had never seen. So I was just watching. This is how I cope with stress. It's just,
Yeah.
it's scary movies. And it was just fascinating to dip into that era so specifically, but
Mhm.
then also like so struck by just like the casual homophobia and just like the things that are just like very problematic by today's standards. And I'm like, oh, that was just normal. And that was like kind of, like it's, um, it's kind of internalized, as like those of us who grew up in that era, it's like kind of, and then, that's where I guess queer shame comes from. And it's like you kind of have to work out of that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to look at it through today's lens. And there's a lot of stuff actually that's going on today, like with AI and, the discourse around, the synthetic, like when electronic music and synthesizers, started becoming more mainstream in the '80s, there was a lot of discourse around like, is that really music?
Right.
And then you have like bands like ZZ Top that essentially replaced their drummer with a drum machine. And so it's like really interesting. There are parallels, in all of the industries that is kind of fascinating to look back on.
Yeah. It's interesting too, like with a film like Lisa Frankenstein, for example,
Mhm.
how like a lot of films that go back to that era, it's more vibrant than it actually was at the time.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And yet it feels like you're watching it because I loved Lisa Frankenstein. And I thought what they did with that, which was really strong, like I felt like the pacing and the editing felt more akin to like an '80s film than like today's pacing. But you're right with like the neon lighting and the like the very stylized set design. You look back on some of the stuff from the era, and it's a little bit more because like color grading is a thing that
Yeah.
is much more aggressive now than it was then because it's like you're shooting on film and then you're processing it, and you can grade it to a certain extent, but the goal then was to make it look more natural, I think. So that was also something that we were thinking about, like with the music videos and things, is like to not get too aggressive with, how we treat it. Because I didn't want it to look like an Instagram filter. I was sort of a one-man post-production team. I spent a lot of time researching like what does VHS look like when you transfer it, and it's like what is the qualities. I actually taped some of the music videos on actual VHS because I have a VCR, and I found that it degraded it almost too much, where I was like we're gonna lose too. So
Right.
I was like, okay, what do I want to take from that, and then also dial it back, and then I have some filters, and it's like, I'm not just like taking the stock, just like buying a filter online and setting it and forgetting it.
Right. Like whenever I think about the 80s, I think of a lot of flannel, and I think of like the wood paneling. And a lot of like
Yeah.
that movies we don't see a lot of paneling.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Like my grandmother's house was like
Yeah.
panel everywhere, like plaid or like flannel, everything. So yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what production designer I was. It was an interview with the production designer. It might have been for Stranger Things, but they were talking about how like looking at architecture and like what a house, what the kitchen looks like, or is like, and that one, I think I'm a fan of Stranger Things. I think it kind of the later seasons felt a little bit less grounded to me. I felt like those early seasons felt a little bit more authentic. But either way, this production designer, and again, I don't remember exactly if it was Stranger Things, but she was talking about how, actually, if you think about the 80s, it's like the architecture, like the house they're living in, wasn't built in the 80s. It was probably built in the 50s, and so you have to look at like a couple decades earlier, and then like and then the cars that the kids are driving, and like things like that. It's like it's all not because if it's like it was made in the 80s, then it was new, and like there are certain characters that might say something about. It's like if they're wealthy or they just built a new house or whatever. But for the most part, it'd be like a little bit older style, and so that's interesting to think about. And that was fun with Rathbone and in like sourcing those props and stuff. That was something that Dakota helped me with. But I was more on prop duty. He did a lot of thrifting, and had a lot of stuff from like his own archives, from because he's not only his drag stuff, but obviously really into Halloween, and he just has like a massive costume closet. So that was fun.
You having the Grim Reaper in the story, I don't know if you've seen it. It was a short-lived TV series in the early 2000s. It's called Dead Like Me.
I'm familiar with it. I haven't watched it, but somebody recommended it to me. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded it that your film reminds me of that
Okay.
series. So I definitely would check it out. It's like a lot of great, very throwback humor, very 80s kind of style humor.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, speaking of which, so Rohan, who played Viper, the lead guitarist, also plays Grim. And I loved his performance because he's underneath the mask, but like his pantomime and like his
Yeah.
presence. That scene where we're like sitting there in the waiting room and like he's reacting, and I was just cracking up just watching the footage from that. It was so different from his other character, but also like taking because he's supposed to be Viper, is like in the afterlife. So it's like taking um, I guess physical cues from that character, but also like doing something a little bit different with it. And it's uh, it's harder than it sounds to like to not have dialogue and to like have this presence where it's like it's all pantomime. But I thought he did a fantastic job, and
I
you
agree.
wouldn't know it. Is like it was meant to be kind of mysterious. It's like who is this person? It could theoretically be anyone, but it was actually him for real.
Yeah. Earlier you were talking about turning to horror to kind of de-stress. So, like, what are some of your comfort horror that you watch a lot?
Comfort horror that I watch. I mean, one of my favorites in recent years is I Saw the TV Glow. I am just obsessed with the aesthetic of that. It's just such a spot on, like cerebral, like liminal horror I'm getting really into these days. Um, when it came out, Smile 2 was
Yeah,
like if we're talking about musical horror films, like the music in that is legit,
it
and
really is.
Naomi was like she just crushed it. And when I saw that in the theater, I was having kind of a weird day at work. It was like kind of I mean, it wasn't like a terrible day, but it's like I was kind of in a funk a little bit, and I was like, you know, I want to go to the theater and get the shit scared out of me for 2 hours. And I went, and it did not disappoint. And it has this way of like on the other side of it, it's like life ain't so bad, It's like it could be a lot worse. I could be chased around by a smiling demon that's like infecting me. It's like it actually like did the trick and made me feel better. And that's another one that I've revisited a few times because it's genuinely freaky, but also like I love the music and the imagery and yeah, it's I don't know. There's something about I was reading actually a study about this where there is something to that of like using it as a way to unpack your own anxieties and like process them in a way that is safe. It's sort of like riding a roller coaster. You get that adrenaline rush, but you also know ostensibly that you're safe. And so it allows you to kind of like do this mental exercise, and then come out the other side of it, with the realization. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
Like along with that, like I love slasher movies, and I because I
Yeah.
find them very cathartic, especially when you have like the final girl who ends up conquering the monster. I find that
Hmm.
really cathartic. So I watch a lot of like slasher movies, like Halloween, H2O.
Yeah.
It's an important one for me. I watch that constantly. So yeah, like I slashers are like that's like my sweet spot for me.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm trying to think of other examples of like, do I have favorite slashers? I mean, I love Scream, of course. Like, who doesn't these days? I I don't know. It's sort of like it was so ahead of its time, and now like this kind of like meta horror is has become so mainstream that it's like almost cringe. But it's like kind of refreshing to go back to the source, and it's like, oh, when this was new, it really did feel so refreshing at the time. And those of us of a certain age who remember when it came out. But yeah, I'm trying to think other. I mean, the Friday the 13th movies are. For one thing, I was born on the 13th, so Jason's birthday is my birthday. Actually, in the first one, it said something about June 13th. Like that's literally my birthday. So I'm like, okay, I guess I guess we have that in common. But that's a fascinating franchise that I had not seen the entirety of it until the pandemic when it was part of my marathon, and that takes some like wild turns where like the sixth one is like it opens with like a James Bond parody,
Oh
just like
yeah.
okay, we're just going there. All right,
And then like Jason Takes Manhattan is not really about that. It's more like Jason takes a boat.
takes a boat.
Yeah. Which like I love the last like 10 or 15 minutes of it when he's actually in Manhattan. It's such a cool contrast of him being like this swamp monster basically,
Yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah.
bright lights of New York City.
Yep.
I would love to have seen like an actual like Jason Takes Manhattan. So yeah, and along with that, I love Scream 6 because it's like it's what Jason Takes Manhattan should have
A
been.
little bit. Yeah, yeah. I thought that that was cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, gets out of the comfort zone a little bit.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I was talking to another film director recently about like the meta horror and interesting, like looking at post Scream slashers, feeling
Hmm.
like they have to have a hook. Like these
Yeah.
days, it has to be to really stand out, unless you're like Terrifier. But to really stand out, you have
Hmm.
to have. I think of like films like The Final Girls, where the character is
Hmm.
sucked into an '80s slasher movie. Um,
Hmm.
it's interesting. Do you feel like that? a lot of horror has to have like a hook to really stand out.
Yeah, I mean it's tempting to yeah, how do I want to phrase that? I mean, because everything's been done before. I mean, that was true decades ago, but it's like so it's all about like putting your own fresh spin on it. I'm interested to see. I haven't seen it yet. It sounds like you interviewed the filmmakers, but Faces of Death. I'm like fascinated by that premise because it's like, oh, here's meta, but it's like the framing of it seems really smart to me, where it's like this, it's not really a remake, but it's like referencing it, but they're kind of doing their own thing. And I think finding ways to be meta in a fresh and original way is like harder to come by these days. I don't think it's enough to say, wah, wah, we're in a slasher movie. It's that's been done before. And so now it's like finding new ways to bend the rules.
And speaking of Faces of Death, like, have you seen the original?
I haven't seen the original. I've seen I think that they did a recap of it in uh what's it called? The documentary uh In Search of Darkness.
Okay, yeah.
Um so that's I haven't it looks quite disturbing, and I don't know if I have the stomach to like watch that, but I know the gist of it.
Okay. I first saw it like about a year ago. Uh,
Okay.
my letterbox review was like basically, I regret my life choices. And it's basically because some of that stuff it reminds me a lot of Cannibal Holocaust. If
Oh
you've
yeah.
seen
Mhm.
that, so
Yep.
it has that feeling to it where it feels real, feels too
Mhm.
real.
Mhm.
So the remake is because like we are so desensitized to violence, especially with like social media, TikTok, YouTube, and so
Mhm.
like how do you spin that for a new audience and make it just as shocking? So like I was really impressed by what they chose to do with it.
Cool.
So
I might sneak out and go see it tonight. So
I
we'll
definitely
see.
recommend it.
We'll see how much packing I get done.
Dacre Montgomery is like just absolutely incredible in that movie. Seriously impressed with what he did.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I love him. Looking forward to it.
cool. Well, I just kind of want to wrap up here.
Yep.
Being an indie filmmaker, how do you kind of process like reviews and negative like reviews specifically?
That's a great question. I mean, all art is subjective, obviously, and you're not going to connect with everyone. But my favorite feedback, honestly, my favorite audience feedback is when you're screening it for a live audience. Like even our preview that we had a few weeks ago. I would say about half of the people in that audience knew me, and then about half didn't. So it's it kind of leans into a friendly audience. But even so, if the jokes don't land, people aren't going to laugh just to be polite. And so it was really heartening that it was like, oh, this actually does kind of work, because most of the people who had seen it before then, it was just like three people on a couch that I'm like screening it for, and there's just like a little bit of a different vibe. So I love watching movies in the theater in general, but seeing my own stuff, it's like very unvarnished feedback. And it also very much depends on the permutation of the audience. Like my last film, Thirst Trap, um, I had a screening at Fantastic Fest, and they screened my film before a feature. They did a repertory screening of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and the cast was there. And so that was cool. But it's like everybody in that audience, it was a sold out show, right? It's like they're there to see Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And then it's like, okay, so now for 5 minutes, we're watching this other asshole's film. And so that was like, that was an awkward, like, it wasn't, it was one of the bigger audiences for that film. But then I've had smaller audiences where it was like, like especially more queer focused audiences where it's like, okay, this is the audience that I made it for, and then it like really connects. Yeah, I don't know. I guess any kind of creative person, but especially filmmakers, need kind of a tough skin, and it's just like it's nothing personal. But I prefer the kind where there's not an agenda behind not laughing at a joke. It's like either it lands or it doesn't. So I find that helpful.
So what is your plan with Wrathbone? Do you like plan to take it, want to take it to other festivals or?
Yeah, we've submitted it to quite a few, and so yeah, we're just waiting to see where it lands. I think the runtime is challenging. As somebody who runs a film festival myself, like longer shorts are harder to program, and so we're
Right.
thinking about ways to especially after the success of our preview screening, maybe like going on tour with it, maybe doing other in-person screenings or doing bringing in a little bit of theater where we can like be in character and kind of bring that live element to it. I think experiential um, events are trending now because like everyone's kind of burned out with the algorithms and on screen time, and there really is something to sharing a space, and even if it's technically a smaller audience than who might see it online, it's just cooler and more fun. So yeah, we're kind of rolling with it, but next month when we release the soundtrack and then I relaunch my YouTube channel, we'll kind of see where that goes, and yeah, hopefully have some other live events and other festival screenings beyond that.
Yeah. Would you like consider doing it as a full feature or?
Yeah, I mean, I have an idea for a sequel actually that's a little
Okay.
bit like Evil Dead 2, where it's sort of like a remake, but mostly a sequel. That I wouldn't want to just do the same story and like expand it. We thought a lot about that when we were making it. Is like, okay, it's already going to be like a half hour. Like, what if we add a couple extra scenes or another song or something? But I didn't want to stretch it beyond its integrity. I think it actually has a really nice structure, and I think that it's nice and tight. Even at 30 minutes, I don't think it's boring. But the sequel would be I have a title, Wrathbone Rising, and they come back from the dead. It's modern day. Frankie Echo is back. He's gone viral, and the internet has made him powerful. So now they have to stop Frankie from taking over the world with the internet. So I think that if we did a feature version, you could sort of recap a lot of the history of like what happens, even like in a mockumentary form again, but you
Yeah.
could do that in a way that borrows stuff from that film, but doesn't require us to remake it necessarily.